Yeah, it's fourth grade.
Jeez.
Hey,
Well,
we're broadcasting.
I'm married. That's one thing.
You're married?
Yeah.
That's awesome. You live here in town?
I'm in DeSoto.
Dude, it's awesome. Good for you. Yeah, dude, I've been bumming around. Let's see,
I
from the
would
last...
like to remind everybody that we are live.
Cool. We'll start small conversation unless you want to cut in whenever.
Yeah. No,
you
you could talk afterwards if you want. That's perfectly fine, but we should probably get to the point of why we're here. And I would like to introduce everybody watching here or in the future, since this will be on demand, to our little book club that I'm running. It's going to be an ongoing project where we take books, we analyze, discuss, and probably tear them apart as best as we can, chapter by chapter. But because we haven't decided on the book until today, the first episode, we will be covering The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Anybody else like to set a premise of this book, or?
You were cutting out there, so.
Oh, was I? Okay.
Yeah.
How much of that would have been durable?
What?
What was that? Yeah, you're cutting out, man.
Say what?
Rick, I blame Brian for that.
It's a good idea to blame. Good person.
Yeah, let's see. Do you sound even stable now?
Somewhat stable.
Somewhat stable. Okay.
That's
So, we're covering The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. The question is, who wants to set up the premise?
Okay.
I can if nobody wants to. I'm just trying to...
I'll start it off.
Okay.
So just a base synopsis of everything
Yeah. Just an overview.
without giving the amazing twist ending.
You can or not. This is technically a review and discussion, and we're going to dive deeper into it, so it's you.
All right. So the short story is pretty much you have a very small town, like everybody knows everybody, and it seems like a pretty rural-ish town or whatever. But they're all gathering together for the center, to the square, for a tradition in which people, all you hear is that it's called the lottery. You have names get drawn, go heads of household, and once that head of household gets drawn, you go for the people who are inside the household, and you just draw the lottery. It seems like a pretty normal, traditional thing because everybody sees it as a second, like it's normal to them. It's traditional. You end up finding out later on that the entire lottery is about who's going to die, who gets stoned to death. And it's pretty interesting because it does talk about how we kind of view traditions almost. Probably going a little bit further than just a base synopsis, but yeah. Lottery happens, tradition in small town, and then people die.
Okay, that's a very good starting point. So even to set up more, the story was written in 1948, which is shortly after the Second World War. So there's a lot of setup there on how people were viewing traditional societies before that. They believe that a lot of our modern day traditions led to the Second World War to begin with, and was trying to have a good viewpoint of how we're absolutely no better than the people in the past, and using this modern day example to set that up. So I think we can dive in deeper from there too.
Mm-hmm. Only thing that they talk about, like, that hints at why they're even doing it is like very tribalistic of what was the line? It was like lottery in June, corn will grow soon, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that
It was
like
a very brief moment talking about the harvest that's
only
to come,
line of why they even do it. And like it even hints about that they forget most of the reason that they're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of traditions we do that we don't even remember the reason why we started them.
But it's like you have old man Warner, to quote, he's like, he complains that everybody else has lost the tradition and that nobody does the tradition anymore. And then you have him pretty much forgetting why they even do it. He just does it because he's done it for the rest of his life, and to not do it is just blasphemous.
Yeah, I mean, even to the point where he's talking about how, despite complaints about how the tradition has changed, he doesn't see how the other towns could start giving up the lottery,
Yeah.
as mentioned there.
I think the thing that's most horrifying is just how serene everybody is about it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's basically stoning someone. It's basically like sanctioned murder, and it happens every year, and nobody knows why. But you see at the very end, it's like see little children holding up the stones. You know, it's creepy, you know, and everyone seems to be like really into it. Especially the person that gets murdered at the end. You know, even the children are joining in, and there's
Even her
no
son.
hint or yeah. There's no emotion to children that we're going to kill the mom. You know, I think that's what makes it even more horrifying.
Yeah, Tessa's like the only person who actually has any links towards this whole event. And even before, she's the one that's picked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was late even. And she was like all blasé about the whole thing of like, oh, I clean forgot what day it was. And like that, as soon as she saw her husband was the one that got the lottery, and then her whole family saw. And
yeah, there was
a
lot of
oh, it's unfair.
There was a lot of foreshadowing to it. Like,
I mean,
Tessa being late kind of said she was going to be the one chosen from the very beginning. That was pretty much there. And you kind of see the twist coming. Even just roughly when you see the boys lining their pockets with the stones, stacking them up because they have to get these stones. And you're probably like, well, they could just be boys being boys. I mean, a lot of guys, like kids, like to throw rocks at each other. But why else would they be gathering these?
Maybe they're building a stone house. I don't know.
I was gonna say it's kind of interesting how you can kind of look at it as a way that Miss Hutchinson was like, she was like, we can assume that she was pretty excited because she like rushed to it. She was like, she didn't want to be late to the tradition, and she kind of figured it's like commonplace at this point. But whenever she gets chosen, it's like, or whenever Bill gets chosen, everything just breaks for her. She doesn't want to do it anymore. And I think that's one of the things we can kind of assume that like tradition doesn't really matter to us until we actually get affected by it.
Yeah. Like in today, a lot of minorities, they did not listen to or anything, and or especially like the thing that popped in my head mostly was like homosexuality and how that's viewed based on traditions of marriage and stuff like that, and how they're ostracized. And it's not until it's to you that you really look into it more. Thankfully, in modern time now, we have more people to be allies. But especially in the 1948, that was right before the civil rights movement and stuff like that. But just that, yeah, like Reese said, that you don't notice it. And even Old Man Warner seemed proud that he's been in it for 77 years.
Yeah.
And I thought it was kind of interesting of like, he was proud of it. And it's like, well, yeah, it's easy to shrug off what you're doing when you've been lucky for that long.
Well, I saw it more as an allegory to the draft, because it's something that, a lot of people don't have to deal with today because there's so many people that are going for military service voluntarily. We're not in a home front war or the threat of a home front war, so we don't have to draft anybody. But being just after the last World War, and we entered late into World War II as it was, the draft, which is a good idea, it is, but it seems like a better idea until it affects your family personally, and then you start to have regrets about it, even though overall it is a good idea in practice.
I'm sorry to interrupt you earlier. I think it's important to note, like, it's 1948, and this is she's writing for the New Yorker at the time, and
yes, which is mostly satirical works.
Well, exactly. So basically, it's supposed to be, happy, feel-good stories, and then this horror story comes out of left field, and she got a lot of hate mail too. I think it was like 2 stories a day, a dozen letters a day.
It was so bad that she had to get a separate PO box because she couldn't even talk to her mailman anymore.
That was one thing I thought of too. Like I was thinking of the time period of when this was written, because one of the things I could see the foreshadowing, but I've read, modern day dystopian novels where they kind of set it up, but dystopian novels weren't really popular back then. They probably haven't had much experience with a story like this back then. So the twist at the end for them in 1948 would have been a big one.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost no difference than
No,
No, you could say first.
okay.
That's fine.
I mean, you have to think about it. I mean, Sunday morning, they just want to read the paper, and then along comes this woman with this, let's murder the wife kind of story. That'd really touch a nerve.
Yeah, and a lot of people canceled their subscriptions because of that too. That was like the biggest canceling subscriptions in their entire run. But what I was saying was, it's very similar to the whole setup happens, because they just kind of, it's almost like a lottery to how they pick the individuals. There's no clear, concise reason why they pick it. They just go with children because children are innocent, and an innocent sacrifice is the best.
Mm-hmm.
Which they even do in this manner to make sure the sacrifice is as innocent as possible. Instead of judging somebody based on their merits or anything, they completely throw everything out the window, and the person is completely random.
Well, it goes back into that whole like Jewish ideology. It like you said, it's just a lot more random. It's just not just Jewish ideology, but just any like ancient religious ideology of the scapegoat. It's like, if we put everything that could possibly be wrong from us to this one person and then kill that one person, then things will be better. It was like the whole lottery in June, corn will be heavy soon. It's like, if they didn't have the lottery, it's that whole thing of, well, we don't have corn because we've obviously done something wrong. If we end up putting everything that we've done wrong to this one person, even if they're randomly chosen, we'll end up having a greater harvest.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that it's kind of a throwback to the old tribal idea of the sacrifice and then the agricultural season, renewal. It's by stoning. I mean, it's 1948, so they've got guns. They could hang someone, but it's by stoning, and that's ancient. That's something that goes way back to like the Bible, even like ancient times, like the Egyptians, Sumerians, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the power of the stoning was that there was actual benefit for a community behind it, as tragic and dark of a thing that it is that because everybody participates in the stoning, those who are not being stoned grow closer and stronger as a community, which in turn would accidentally help the harvest, but probably not the one that's coming up. Probably the previous one, because they would have done better work. So you're relying more on the one from last year. You just can't correlate these two things together.
Yeah, it's communal mob mentality. That's kind of the other disturbing thing. It's like, it's a really small town. Everybody knows who these people are. So you're not just killing some random person. You're killing someone who's probably actually either someone else's child that you look after, or it's it's a person that teaches your child.
Mm-hmm.
Or even potentially the person that taught you.
Yeah.
It really doesn't make sense for the story. It's almost like, like the dad joins in, like the children join in, like let's stone mama kind of thing. It's that I just think it makes it even more disturbing. There's no hesitation on their part.
I mean, look at Bill, his wife. Like the moment his household gets picked, he looks at it and like Tessa's freaking out. She's like, I don't want to do this. We've already done too much, and she's making all these excuses. If you didn't let him pick for too long, he's just like, shut up, like just let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because this is the way things are supposed to go.
Yeah, it's like just let the traditions go as they are, and as unfairly as they are, as you may think they're unfair, it's happening.
And even when she was chosen, and the guy running it, Mr. Summers, he's like, okay, let's wrap things up, get back to work. It's like, oh, it's nothing, and that they disassociate themselves, act, because it's better to just shut off your brain and go, okay, we gotta do it. Just go back to the way things are. It's good for whatever reason, I don't know, but we'll do it anyway.
So going back to the whole historical context, what can we think of back in the 40s that incorporated this kind of mob mentality? I mean, so off the top of my head, I'm thinking McCarthyism. Maybe that's just like high school history. That's kind of that I'm remembering from, but that seems like the most obvious example.
Yeah. Well, there's that, and just the whole plight of against the communisms as a whole, because since that's what was rising up, and it didn't matter if someone actually was a communist or not. It's almost like today where you can just be labeled a Nazi and people feel free to punch you.
Yeah.
That mob mentality had been around during the Red Scare.
you notice that in the story that doesn't say what race they are. You know,
Mhm.
always assume they're white or black.
Well,
or
it doesn't matter what race they are. It's
I'm actually-
completely random.
Like a whole thing of stuff that happened in 1948, and because this happened after World War II, so it was like, yeah, we did have like the whole communism scare, and we were fighting against that, but we're still dealing with our own stuff. Like World War II is done. The Red Scare hadn't really like caught up to us yet. That wouldn't happen for another while.
Oh, it was a lot more immediate than people give it credit for when you start looking back into it. Like, the radio programs really hadn't started for a while, but the newspapers were already pushing it because of how, after the end of World War II, the Soviets were taking hold of Berlin as part of their winnings and stuff.
But it was like May 1st, an Idaho senator was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama for meeting through a door marked for Negroes.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of problems.
I just hate when you just walk through Negro doors. It's just, I hate doing that.
Yeah. No, but the real problem is, too, and I think this is one of the big points of it, to just try to put a frame of reference that people could understand by making it more modern, is that the past is pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the only reason there is less suffering now is because of the great suffering of the past. And the reason there'll be less suffering in the future is because of the suffering that we go through now. And that's kind of the whole point to a sacrifice. People back in the past who made like virgin sacrifices and stuff didn't understand the principle that they stumbled upon. But a sacrifice is a bargain with the future that, well, if we suffer now, we won't suffer as heavily in the future. So let's do the suffering now. It's like going out of your way to go kill snakes in the snake dens around you instead of just dealing with the ones that come to your front door.
Actually,
But you notice it doesn't actually change anything. I mean, they do the sacrifice every year, but nothing ever changes.
I had
It can
another.
really only take one person. I mean, that's usually how social change happens. Is usually like a Martin Luther King or a Rosa Parks challenging the status quo. But in the book, you don't have that, so no wonder nothing changes. No wonder people keep on getting sacrificed, and the harvest, you know, good or bad, the harvest is going to happen anyways.
But it does change, just not in this particular circumstance. They allude that other surrounding towns had done the lottery too, and they're starting to get rid of it. And change takes a long time to happen properly. You try to change things overnight, and it bounces back and bites you in your face. And it takes like generations to have true change occur.
Well, and it's interesting that they already had little, like the box was an original. Yeah. And all of them were kind of like concerned about that, oh, it's not the original box, but it's like, it's just what it's part of. But they were even concerned about that. And like Mr. Summers he was able to convince everyone because they originally had the lottery on little small chips of wood. Let's change it to paper to make it easier. So it takes those small little increments of change, but that was probably over a long span of time. And those were just, and you know, they're still killing people, but at least it's a different box.
Look at the box as a metaphor even. It's like the box is old and decrepit, and even if it's the original box, it's still breaking apart. It's like the tradition itself is falling apart in front of everybody. You can do everything you can to kind of like keep it hold up and making it look as good as possible and say, no, it's fine. But in tradition's falling apart.
I just want to point out how much I love the imagery of the box. I mean, the way she describes it's almost like the Sorting Hat, you know, from Harry Potter. You know, it's old, it's rickety, it's frayed, but there's a certain gravitas to it. You know, it's almost like it's almost like a relic. You know, you respect it and you fear it at the same time.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons it's in such decay, even though it is a newer box from a literary illusion, is that it represents nature. And because nature is what selects ultimately. Nature is the ground authority on what happens. You can fight it all you want, you can try to keep up with it, but eventually nature's going to take you out one way or another.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the box is alluding to right here, is the selector.
And then you even have like Mr. Summers, who's officiating everything. Like he's officiating everything, but they talk about how there was like a ritual salute and like all this official business and everything. And literally right after that, he's just kind of sitting there with his white shirt and blue jeans, like carelessly with his hand resting on the box and just being kind of blasé and just having a normal conversation with everybody. Like he doesn't even care about how official and how much of a relic it actually is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The tradition doesn't matter to me anymore at this point. It's like he just wants it over with so he can get back to doing his other stuff.
Never mind, he might get clubbed in the head while doing it, you know.
Yeah.
It seems kind of weird. Like everyone's like so serene about it. Like they might die in the next 5 minutes, you know. But you know, whatever, no big deal.
And you're like, yeah, you know, what's the odds it's actually me?
Yeah.
That's why you flip on a sudden, you know, like on a dime when it actually is you, and why Tessa got so, you know, sporadic, because it's like, you thought, what are the odds it's going to be me? With all the people here, all the possible victims it could be, what are the odds that it could actually be me? But then when husband's chosen, it's not even the care for her family that's the problem.
It's her, yeah.
Because of the type of person she is. It's her, because she knows her odds just went up incredibly once her husband was chosen.
Yeah, it's pretty funky that she's the only one freaking out, and the kids, you know, she got the odd. They got the same odds that she does, but the kids are just like, you know. Even Bill's just kind of like, you know, she's probably gonna die, but you know, I'm good, I'm cool.
There was an interesting thing though that like they seemed to make it seem like everyone was relieved that it wasn't the kid. At least it's not the kids.
Yeah.
Well,
because if it has to happen.
Well, she even tried to pull.
If it has to happen,
too.
That would be.
Like at the end, Mr. Summers was like, "Bill, do you draw? Yeah, you draw for the Hutchinsons family. You got any other households in the family?" And then she's like, "There's Don and Ava, who are, it's her daughter and her son-in-law." And she's like, "No, pull them in as well. I don't want to die."
Yep.
Yeah, that's what speaks more to why it's about her and not about her family from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And you knew she was a selfish person too, because she tries to pass the blame on to why she's late to her husband for not telling her it's time. Oh, you could pull me for my dishes. Well, those dishes were going to get done anyway. You probably could have noticed everybody was leaving, and you know what day it is. You're just trying to pass the blame off from one person to the next. And that's what the whole lottery is too. Problems off onto that one person, as I think it was Reese who alluded to earlier with the scapegoat.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Why was she chosen? Was it fate, or is it just pure random? Because the way she acts, she makes herself out to be the protagonist of the story. But at the same time, you know, it's a lottery system. By nature, it's not. I mean, it's random, you know.
For the greater good.
The greater good.
Yeah, well, it's technically for the greater good, but it's completely random. Taking out a selfish person. So while you shouldn't be taking people out, somebody who didn't need to be part of the community was removed by the practice of the community. And so there's the metaphorical, like, allegory there of how the entire thing was written. But from a more realistic standpoint, it's like, well, it could have been anybody. It could have been one of her kids who could be innocent for all we know.
I wanted to point another thing out in that it does kind of talk about, like, this was coming at the dusk of World War II, and even now we still have this whole thing of like, well, the only people who can really do bad things are bad people. But even this thing shows is like, no, regular people can do absolutely horrible things for very traditional reasons.
Yeah.
It's like it's not monsters that are monsters. It's us that can become the monsters.
I also like to point out that sometimes death just comes randomly. I remember when I was in the military and overseas, we told the story about this one guy. The Taliban offered this guy $500 to dig a hole in the side of the road, and that's about a year's salary here in the U.S. And I mean, I would do it if I was getting a year's salary. And you know, eventually that guy got killed because he was just doing that thing, and it was just random. You know, they could have chosen anybody, but they chose him. We could have bombed anybody, but we bombed him. You know, why him? And you know, why me? You know, why does death come for her and why does death come for him? You know, I mean, might say it's fate, but at the same time, it's kind of a lesson that maybe it doesn't matter how bad of a person you are. Maybe death just happens. You know, life just happens.
And that even goes back to the box being a representation of nature itself, because it's the one that selects. It's not the people in town. It doesn't matter about your merits or anything. It's nature selecting that, hey, your time is up, maybe for no reason at all. Your time is just up.
If nobody said life was fair.
Yeah.
Death comes for us all in the end. You can't escape that.
Yeah. So I guess we can, going from the historical context to the current context, talking about the mob mentality. One example springs to mind. Obviously, I was thinking of Brexit. I was following that on the BBC. I mean, it was kind of a weird thing for Americans to follow, but I like being current on events. And I heard a lot from, at least from the Leave category, a lot of people were basically just kind of following this hive mind, you know, oh, we're Scottish or we're Welsh, you know, we don't want to be in the EU, you know, so we're just gonna follow what everybody else is doing, you know.
Well, actually, I have a completely different view on those people because the BBC has kind of skewed the actual narrative of what's going on there.
Oh, go ahead.
And
yeah.
a lot of the problem is that they keep pushing everybody who's going to leave into this box of, we just don't like things the way they are. We don't like the EU, or we don't like the migrants or anything. And when it really came down to it at the end of the day, most of the people who wanted to leave were people who wanted control of their businesses back. Because the EU has so many regulations and they demand so many things that it's really hard to start a business in the UK right now. EU. It's easy to become part of a corporation. They've got so many unions. It's easy to join something that's already there, things that can follow the regulations. But you get bogged down by so many regulations that you can't even start a business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I don't like about current politics right now. Just how we don't encourage people to think. We just encourage people to follow the crowd. You know, we just tell people what we want to hear. We don't report news anymore. We just listen to talking heads. So it's no wonder that people gravitate towards certain channels. I won't say certain channels, but I think definitely the way that news is dissipated today, it's not about encouraging discussion. It's about encouraging mob mentality.
Yeah.
But it's just going back to the story altogether because it's a figure of we need to associate the authority and then we just need to blindly trust the authority because apparently they've got it all handled. I mean, that's the whole thing. The box was the authority in this case, but they did put somebody in charge of the ceremony. And who did they put in charge of the ceremony? The rich guy, the guy who had everything together, the dude who ran and owned the coal company.
Yeah,
from his desk, you know.
You can't I can't assume that it listed everybody, but he's one of the main characters, and I can't see anywhere that he was listed that his name was chosen, or that he even drew.
You know,
no, he did draw. He did draw. That was in there. He stood to the side, walked in from the box, drew, and then went back around. That was in one of the paragraphs.
Let me double check that one.
I think they said it was a Mr. Summers.
Probably passed it.
He put together.
Oh, yeah. Summers holding his slip of paper in the air said, all right, fellas. Okay. My B.
Okay, but here's the question, though. Why was it the Hutchinsons out of all the people? I mean, you know, wasn't he the one that actually created the slips, though? So he was the one that chose the Hutchinsons.
Well, it's not that he chose the Hutchinsons, because the slips were already created, and they get kept in the box, and the whole ceremony happens. The reason it was chosen was because that's how it was written, which is basically just the same act as fate. You could say fate and luck to an extent are very much the same thing. It's just whatever nature chooses to happen, and then you are free to react to it and hopefully not end up killed. But you know, the odds definitely were not in her favor, being that once she was chosen, there was nowhere for her to go. She couldn't react to it. Everybody was around her.
They literally
She's just a woman, probably wearing a dress with an apron, judging by the time and what she was doing ahead of time. So good luck getting pretty far in that with a bunch of guys around you that instantly grab her and drag her to the center.
Now I'm a little confused because the story said that her paper was marked with a black circle, but apparently all the papers have been locked up since the night prior. So how did that circle get on there?
Well, it's because they were drawing papers. So in the random selection, all the papers were blank, and then she drew the one that wasn't blank.
Yeah, I mean they like
That's right.
papers and everything were already they were pre-made and everything. They just locked it so that nobody could go and tamper with it.
Yeah, they even mentioned like who, I forget this, but they mentioned who put the circle there.
Yeah.
Last paragraph when it is chosen, when she is chosen.
When drawing lots, and this is why they also made sure that nobody looked at their lot until the very end.
Yeah.
Every single time a lot is drawn, especially if you pick some arbitrary order like alphabetical or something, if the lot was not already drawn, the odds of you getting the lot increase with every single time it's not drawn. And odds are usually, just because of practices, it ends up about halfway down the list. And if you read names, their family is about halfway down the list.
Yeah.
And then obviously they have sets of lots once the families are already chosen, so they have to pull them all out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is interesting that the very was it Miss Delacour that she ran to first? Let's see if I can get this right.
You're talking about Delacroix?
Well, no. Whenever Tessa first ran up to the crowd, I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Miss Graves that she ran into first?
No, she tapped Miss Delacroix. It was Delacroix.
Was Delacroix?
That was the one she was talking to, and then she tapped her on the arm farewell before she ran up to her husband.
Okay, then that's a moot point then.
Well,
I
forget what it means because
when she's about to stone, what's her name, Miss Hutchinson, you know, she basically like lifts a giant boulder over her head. You're like, let's get going, you know. It's like, wow, she's I can admire that enthusiasm.
yeah.
If only we were this excited whenever it came to stoning people.
Well, and stoning is such a brutal way to kill somebody because you lose a lot of expression just because of the amount of stones that are in the air, so you can't see everything. But it's a slow death if you don't manage to just get like what would be considered a critical hit, one shot to the head that just gives them a concussion that kills them instantly. Otherwise, you actually have to see their emotions and reactions with each shot of pain as they're being bludgeoned to death by these stones.
Yeah.
It's a very brutal way to go.
You actually have to block out some of yourself so that you don't have to like encounter the fact that you're murdering one of your own.
You should just be smart and move to the side of the crowd that has her facing away from you, I guess.
That is because...
Oh,
sorry.
I stood behind everybody. I'm fine.
Well, because like in Bible times and stuff like that, they did stonings. So everyone would have gotten in, even then, of actual stonings. And that would be so
it still goes
strange to me. Like, I mean, yeah, it's different though in a way, but
it's not that different.
I mean, there's some places still actually
Looks
stoning.
like the motivation would be different because when you stone somebody back then, it was to eliminate a sinner or somebody who was bad for your flock, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds all right, but ultimately the same goal is I'm stoning this person so that our future is better because they're not around.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, except in this case, instead of having a merit for why they're being killed as a pure sacrifice to make the future better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be fair, there's the worst ways to go. I mean, you could be the Aztecs and, you know, get your heart cut out.
Ugh.
For the same reasons. It's like the way it happens isn't necessarily the problem. It's the fact that it's happening and why it's
yeah. The people join in. It's just crazy to me.
It's a communal activity.
Yeah, that you get in that hive mind of this is what we're doing, and I'm just going to block it out, even though I'm literally seeing her
have to actually block it out because to them it's not murder.
It's Christmas in June, pretty much.
To them
true,
it
but
is
still,
an activity
like fearful
that
of it.
benefits the community. They're doing what is right as far as they're concerned. That's the dangerous mentality. They're people that's just doing what is right. So they don't even have to block out the fact that the person was murdered because as far as their mind sees it, their conditioning, killing this person is the right thing to do. It's
true.
not the same as like going out on the battlefield and doing the right thing because you're in the heat of a mess and you're with your brothers or whatever. This is like a almost like a religious event.
Yeah. It's kind of the big allegory there.
Yeah. Which even religion was something that was being heavily criticized at that time because they blamed a lot of the stuff on anything that was being done.
That's actually a kind of interesting point because, I mean, racism was still pretty heavy around this time, and there were small towns who would join around for communal lynchings of a black guy. Like, the lynching of someone else was a pretty, I wouldn't say popular thing, but it was a known thing to happen, and it wasn't just one person who did it. It was, in some places, an entire community that would lynch a person.
And maybe not specifically the area this takes place, because this takes place in Shirley's own hometown, but it was just a familiar place that she could design.
Yeah, it wasn't something that everybody was like, oh, well, it happens in fairy tales. It's like, no, this legitimately happens. People know that this happens. And I know that it wasn't like raising awareness of that thing, like, hey, check out what's happening in these small towns. It's like, look, deadly traditions can still happen in small areas. Mm-hmm. To the people that you think are the nicest people and careful people. It's like, yeah, they're really cool. They're just nice farmers. Oh, yeah, they also hold lotteries to stone people. And it wasn't only that one town either. It was like there were numerous towns which we learned just recently stopped doing it.
And to be fair, I mean, that kind of mentality still goes on today. I mean, think back to high school. Anybody who's played high school sports, they've had, initiation or like in basketball, when you finally make the team and then like you're finally with them, you're one of them, but you have to go through you basically have to go with like an initiation thing. We had to do it in the military, that kind of thing. But that kind of thinking starts as early as high school.
Yeah, well, you can even take one step further in high school too. It's like when a single person gets ostracized by the entire class, and you're just like, well, a lot of times there could be a good reason, but sometimes there's just no reason at all. They just end up being the person that the mob ostracizes and pushes against for no clear, evident reason to do it.
The mob mentality thing is like, you're new to this place. There's these group of people. They pretty much point out one person and say, don't have anything to do with this person, or just laugh at him, or do whatever. And it's like, you don't know why you're doing it. You just know that if you do it, you're going to be accepted by it.
Or more specifically, to say to the layman's term, it's the thing to do.
Yeah. See, all the cool kids are doing it.
That's why the kids partake in this stoning, because all the parents do it too, and that's their role models. Those are the people they look up to. Well, if the parents are doing it, of course we're supposed to be doing it because we're trying to become like adults.
Yeah, it would be normal to them.
They're guarding the rocks against all the other kids because these are their rocks. They want to use these rocks. You cannot have them.
And it doesn't have to be a physical activity. We do it in our minds all the time, I think. Especially with just mob mentality, especially like stereotypes. You'd be walking down the street as a male, and then like a woman would be walking towards you, and sometimes I get the vibe that they're kind of worried I'm going to jump out at them, and that's a stereotype. But stereotypes are something we all carry, and we got to worry that we're not following the crowd, and maybe we need to stop and ask ourselves, well, why am I carrying the stereotype? And maybe work to reverse that.
Yeah, because some of them are there for good reasons. They're developed because you needed them, but a lot of them are just there because they were carried over from cultural perspectives or mobs and stuff like that.
Which is why you had to actively rise above it, which is probably one of the things she was trying to convey in her story. Because it makes me wonder what the people who were mentioning, like, oh, I heard this town's getting rid of it. Like, what were they thinking when they heard that?
It's shame. It's like, they're getting rid of this? How dare they?
Yeah, because they were, the one guy who first mentioned it to Old Man Warner. So, like, they knew that he wouldn't approve of it.
Yeah.
But it makes you.
But you know,
Well,
it's only the man that's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was
I
just
think
gonna.
one of the
Oh.
reasons these dissipate, right,
Mhm.
is, and there's a good note to have in there. The reason traditions like these tend to dissipate is because, like the Cain and Abel story at the very beginning, Cain is still making his sacrifice, but he is not being looked down on in a prosperous way for making his sacrifice. So what happens, a lot of these people make their sacrifice and bad things happen anyway. So after a while, they just give up making the sacrifice because, you know, if bad things are going to happen.
Mhm.
And then the next year comes around, they didn't make their sacrifice and yet a good yield comes. So it's like, well, if it can come without their sacrifice, then why are we making the sacrifice?
Mm-hmm. And you notice in the story, it's only the old man that actually keeps the tradition going.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's implied by the other villagers not doing anything, but you know, it's only the old man that speaks up and says, "Oh, we got to keep on doing this ritual, no matter how crazy it seems." And maybe that's food for thought. You know, maybe it's older generations that keep stereotypes or discrimination or just old traditions alive that might not be beneficial, or maybe it's also just young people going along with it.
Mhm.
And maybe it's both.
Yeah, because he was using like slippery slope logic of, well, if we're gonna get rid of the lottery, the next thing you know, we're gonna be living in caves and not working. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna go be animals again. It doesn't keep going on, and you know, people do that. Older generations do that now. People in general do that now. It's like, well, if this happens, just like if you allow gay people to marry, then everyone's gonna want to marry their dog. And that's how they
And a lot
dismiss
of-
it.
I think a lot of that comes from just meeting different people. Like, you notice the people in the village, as a town of 300, I really don't get the feeling that they leave the village that often. Like, going back to the whole, like, gay people getting married, it took me, you know, traveling around the United States and having, you know, best friends. I just had a couple friends that actually got married just like 2 weeks ago in Colorado. I never would have changed my views if I quote, left my village.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good, leaving your village.
Yeah.
Being out of your comfort zone.
I wonder
Yeah,
if they,
well, because you express different genes when you travel, when you go to different places.
Mhm.
Makes
Because
you
it doesn't-
better to
the
leave.
North and the Midwest compared to the South, very culturally different, very different values. And I think in the story, if they brought in people from these villages that didn't do the ritual, maybe they would see how horrified they were, and they might change their ways. Because they're all by themselves, because just the way they've always done it, you know, nothing ever changes.
Yeah, with that gets really dangerous when you do only surround yourself with people who are like-minded. You're around people who push your boundaries, and because that happened to me recently. My mind got opened after I became friends with other people that aren't necessarily in the circle of my influence from when I was younger. If they're not leaving, and it's not really said if it's an American thing, if it's a world thing, that the lottery happened. We just know a few surrounding cities were that way. But it makes you wonder, because like in the Hunger Games, it seems to only happen in America. It makes you wonder like what the other countries are thinking. But they like have no outside communication, it seems, with the other countries.
Mhm.
Or if they might have a ritual that's even worse.
No, that's true. They don't really mention, in this story, they don't mention anything else other than the other surrounding towns that got rid of it.
Yeah. And how negative it is that they actually did get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because the fact that they were negative about it made me think it was at least a country thing, if not a world thing, that, everyone does this.
Well, it
Things
had
that
to at
could be
least
so-
be a society-wide thing. Now, depending on how big the society, we can't know, but
Yeah.
assuming that it was written for a modern American village at the time that it came out, the date was even the same day to line up with the release of the magazine.
Mhm.
It was probably assumed that it was at least like a acceptable North American or United States thing to do if there was no backlash towards this.
Yeah. Nobody's complaining against it, so why are we going to change it?
Yeah.
It's working out for the better of the entire community, so what's the point of changing it? It's working out for everybody, except for the one person that's being killed by it.
Mhm.
But
Or
you know,
maybe
that's one person.
Yeah.
Maybe just some of the corn thing, you know, it's everyone just kind of follows on with it, and everyone's just kind of loopy in the head.
Well, you can kind of ask it this way: is like, do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? I guess is kind of another way that we can phrase this. It was like the fact that it's affecting an entire community of people is apparently far outweighing the single person that it's actually murdering. I was like, these kids just lost a child, but hey, it's for the better of society to grow together if it means that we get to kill your mother. Or there's a potential case that we will kill your mother. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. And you can't even say that people are like loopy in the head for doing that, because these aren't barbaric practices. They're not primitive. These are sophisticated practices.
Yeah.
They're just practices that develop out of lack of information. So to them, until they see proof otherwise, it only makes sense to do this because this is what's affecting our corn growth and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's rational to keep doing this until it becomes irrational.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, they don't sound crazy. They sound sophisticated. It's kind of like the hot fuzz thing, you know. It's for the greater good, but it's for a noble cause, you know. These people aren't nuts. They're just trying to live their lives the best they can.
Yeah. They just want to eat. They just want to like be together. They want to be in a community and do what's right. It just so happens that one of the things that's right is casting a lottery that will murder people. And I mean, at some point you can't really fault it because it does go to traditional things, but you also can because it is actually resulting in the death of somebody else, which in modern times we're like, yeah, that we should not be able to do that. And I mean, it's almost 1950 at this point. Of course, it's still going to be modern times, be the whole thing of like, you should not kill people. We just went to this whole thing where somebody killed killed people. Like a lot of people. It's like, you cannot do this. Maybe we like
for almost no reason at all, too. Like
Yeah.
It's pretty arbitrary.
Yeah.
for no reason other
Rationalized,
than I think it's right. Yeah.
but arbitrary.
I think it's even more horrifying now than back in the day. I mean, back in the day when the story was released, I mean, lynchings were still in living memory. Now, these days, I mean, maybe overseas, but not here. You know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. You know, lynchings, stonings, it's not the American way anymore.
Well, and even if it is, it's some like really rare occurrence that you pay attention to because how rare it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. We don't have much time left if we're going to keep this on the hour mark. So let's see if we have any closing
I think we
thoughts for
kind of
this,
covered
maybe
everything that
wrapping
this
up.
story has to offer, at least I think. It's a pretty cut and dry story, at least I think.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's very cut and dry. There's some very, very deep allegorical meanings to it, but being how short it is, even with how deep the meanings are, it doesn't really take too long to cover it all.
Yeah, there's a reason why they teach this in middle school.
Yeah.
It's not in your middle school. They didn't teach you.
Except even in middle school.
Yeah. Mine was like Harry Potter and, you know, all this feel-good books, nothing like murder and, you know, mayhem.
Well, I remember reading this in the 6th grade for where I was. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I remember reading this in middle school.
But they didn't cover some of these same topics, but I understand that a lot of the higher allegorical stuff is a little heavy for a middle schooler to get. So you kind of wean them in with like the versions of the same topics.
Yeah, you got a lot of them like work up to like 1984 and Animal Farm, you know, that's some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Welcome to 4th grade.
What you want to do.
First thing is going to be 1984.
What you want to do is you want to get things that have like the same basis, and you want to build a principle that you can keep stacking upon. So you find something that has like a basic form of undue sacrifice, and then you find more complex forms of it, and then you can eventually just build up on it mentally so that children can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. I mean, this story is relevant today. The whole idea of mob mentality. I think a lot of in education they put out a lot of like these really old books that are usually really good, but they like Huckleberry Finn. Like I haven't read it in ages, but I can't remember for the life of me how relevant it is to my life today. But a story like this, that's something you can take home with you.
I think actually Finn is a very relevant book for most people. I think most people are just missing a lot of the important stuff from it.
It does
just
do that whole mom mentality thing of like, because this one thing is in the book, you can never read this book. And it was like, have you actually read the book and studied the themes? It was like, no, it just has this thing. Okay, we're going to ban it. And it was like, no, you're missing the entire point of the book. It's the whole ignorant mom mentality thing behind it. It's like,
which even the whole point to Huckleberry Finn and also Tom Sawyer in relation were not being bogged down by the standards of society.
Yeah.
So those are some really good books for people to be reading, but nobody's reading them now because a lot of them are banned from schools.
I did not know that those were banned from schools.
Oh, Huck Finn's been banned for a long time.
Huck Finn for a fact because of the very particular word that's said in it.
Oh.
It was not banned in Cedar Hill, though, which is really weird. It was one of our required readings.
From there in Cedar Hill?
It's not banned in Cedar Hill.
Huh. I figure like times have changed since high school. Yeah, I mean it's 2017. You know, banned books shouldn't be a thing.
Well, no,
they shouldn't, because how can you learn if they are?
A thing.
You should specifically read the banned books.
Yeah. Find out why they are banned.
Yeah.
I mean, we have Fahrenheit 9/11 for this.
They Fahrenheited 9/11 for Fahrenheit 9/11. What? They banned Fahrenheit 9/11? I wonder where I read that before. Oh, Fahrenheit 9/11.
Okay, well, that's our clothing thoughts. I think the moral here is to respect tradition, but at the same time, don't blindly follow it. Maybe just look over and see if what you're doing is actually right. And read challenging books, because you can learn a lot about life from them, to not repeat the mistakes of the past. I think we can all agree on that. And we'll see you next time, where we've already had the poll completed. We are reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We'll be talking about Chapter 1. I hope all of us enjoy it. You at home can read it too. Communicate with us in the chat. I didn't bother looking at the chat this time because, you know, nobody even knew we were doing this ahead of time. But
yeah, seriously, man, it's been a great